different religions, different theologians, different periods of time, they've all got their different concept, their different definitions of what God is. So when they say God exists, do they even mean the same thing? And when atheists say that God doesn't exist, are they even talking the same language? How can we deal with this problem? In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 philosophical attempts to navigate the different definitions of God. And at the end of the video, I'm going to explain the one that I think works best philosophically speaking. So make sure you stick around for that. Okay, and we're going to get going with that right now. Hi, I'm Mark Jago. I'm a philosophy professor, and today we're going to be looking at the problem caused both for theists and atheists of the different definitions of God. So to be an atheist, you have to say God or gods don't exist, but exactly what do we mean by God? And it turns out people all over the place mean loads of different things by that little word. Theologians throughout history, the world over, have disagreed on how that little word should be defined. And kind of in a way, this makes the definition of atheism a bit tricky, right? Because atheism is defined in terms of God. So if we're not clear about what we mean by that word, God, maybe we're not clear about what we mean by atheism. So what I'm going to try and do in this video is try to get a little bit clearer on how we should understand that word, that concept, God. Okay, well, if that sounds good to you, you can do me a favor. You can give the video a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notifications. Okay, so just to get some kind of sense of the scale of the issue here, let me just give you some definitions that have been used in theology and philosophy of religion for God. God is the supreme being. God is the creator of the universe. God is the being that's perfect in power, wisdom, and goodness. God is the ruler of the universe. And then some that are getting kind of even a bit weirder. God is the divine principle. God is the infinite mind. God is nature. Okay, that one's really weird. Okay, so these are all attempts to define God, one single God. If you're trying to define the notion of a God for kind of theological systems where there are multiple gods, that's going to get even trickier because there are all these different definitions of God floating around. How are we going to make sense of what the atheist says when they say God doesn't exist? So what I'm going to try and do is run through 4 attempts to kind of make sense of this kind of tricky situation and kind of say they're not really going to work. And then I'll tell you how I think we should go about it. Okay, so attempt number 1, we've got a bunch of definitions for God. Well, let's just look at what they've all got in common, and we'll say that is the kind of core concept of God. Okay, so a theist is somebody who thinks that some entity exists that has that core of properties, and an atheist is someone who thinks that nothing exists that has that core of properties. Okay, I mean, that all sounds good, apart from you might look at all of these definitions and think, well, they just don't have anything in common. So, for instance, taking God as the creator of the universe or God as the divine mind, it's not obvious that those concepts are going to have anything in common. You could imagine entities that are kind of fitting one but just don't fit the other at all. Okay, so I don't think this approach is going to be very successful. Okay, attempt number 2, we're basically going to relativize all of our talk about God and atheism and all that to the definitions. So for each definition, we're going to say, okay, God, according to that definition, do you believe in that God or not? If you believe in God under that definition, you are a theist kind of type 1. And if you don't, you're an atheist type 1. Okay. Definition number 2, do you believe in a God like that? If you do, you're a theist type 2. And if you don't, you're an atheist type 2. And so on and so on and so on. So for each definition of God that might be out there, you might be a theist or an atheist or an agnostic or whatever with respect to that notion of God. Okay, well, at least this approach is pretty clear and precise, but I just don't think it kind of fits the facts about how we use notions like theism and atheism. After all, pretty much everyone who believes in God has their kind of preferred way of thinking about God. Okay, so they have kind of roughly their own definition in mind. Do we really want to say that although they're a theist with respect to that definition, they are an atheist in some other sense? You know, somebody who has kind of built their life around believing in God, you don't want to sort of say, oh, in some sense they're a theist, in some sense they're an atheist. No, they're just a theist, right? You know, it doesn't really seem to fit the facts of how people use those terms, theism and atheism, right? We want a kind of an all-in sense of, yep, those are the theists and those are the atheists. Okay, so attempt number 3. Kind of a bit the same as the last one. We're going to relativize everything to religions. Okay, so now we can talk about not just God, but the Christian God, the God of Islam, the gods of Hinduism. Okay, and we can say, do you believe in that God? Okay, so you're a theist with respect to the Christian God. Do you believe in that God? No, so you're an atheist with respect to the God of Islam or whatever. And again, kind of similar problems to the last attempt. You're going to get a whole bunch of people who we really want to classify as theists, but they're going to come out as atheists in some sense, right? So if you believe in the Christian God, but not the God of Islam, you're going to be a theist in one sense and an atheist in the other sense. Whereas we want to say that Christians, by and large, are theists. They're not atheists in any sense. I mean, and after all, they spend quite a bit of time, complaining about atheists and sometimes, I guess back in the past, burning them and stuff. So kind of a bit weird to say that a lot of those people were, in some sense, atheists. That just doesn't seem right at all. Okay, attempt number 4. This one's slightly different. We are going to think about objects of worship. A God is an object of worship. Now, the good thing about this kind of approach is it kind of makes sense not just of the definition of God, but also of the practice of religion, because by and large, a large part of a religion is worship, and that's what you do when you take part in religious practice. You worship a god or some gods, okay? So we think of the definition of God kind of in terms of religious practice. God is an object of worship. That's probably a bit too simplistic, because you could imagine worshipping loads of different things. So imagine a really powerful king who kind of through his, military power or whatever decides and decrees, all of my subjects have to worship me, okay? And let's suppose that they do. So that king is an object of worship, but that doesn't make them a god. Okay? So you might think, okay, right, yeah, that definition was too simple. It's not being an object of worship, in fact, that makes you a god. What a god is, what the concept of God is being worthy of worship. Okay. So a god is a being, an entity that you should worship, that is worthy of receiving your worship. Okay, so I guess that gets over the kind of, narcissistic king issue. But now look at it the other way, right? Mightn't there be, in theory at least, a god who isn't worthy of worship, like bad God, right? So imagine a God who just does bad stuff. Maybe that's the Christian God, right? Maybe there is a God that just allows loads of really bad stuff to happen, and you think, kind of on balance, looking at all the stuff that's happening in the world, it's more bad than good. Are they worthy of worship? Doesn't seem like it. But, we're saying they're a God. So there we're imagining a God who isn't worthy of worship. So it looks like this definition isn't going to be the right one. Okay, so I've tried 4 attempts at defining God. I don't think any of these kind of ways of doing it are going to work. Let me tell you how I think we should go about understanding what we mean by a concept like God. So the basic idea is, often it's really hard to define, really precisely, with a definition, concepts that matter to us. But actually we understand those concepts pretty well. So let me give you an example that's, got nothing to do with religion, theism, whatever. Think about a kind of bog standard concept like a chair, right? We all understand that concept. We all understand what chairs are. It's pretty hard to give a really super accurate definition of what a chair is. Yeah, it's something for sitting in, but so are sofas. Okay, well, it's something that one person sits in. Well, you can sit on a stool. You can sit on a desk. Okay, it's something that's designed, its function, its purpose is for one person to sit on. Yeah, but, bar stools and stuff like that. Okay, well, it's not too high. It's got a back on it. Well, some bar stools have a back on them. And, exactly how high does it need to be? And then there's all these kind of in-between cases, is a high chair, like a kid's high chair, a chair. It kind of looks a bit more like a bar stool than it does with the kind of chair I'm sitting on. It's just really tricky to say, precisely what something has to be to count as a chair. But it kind of doesn't matter, right? Because we all know what chairs are. And if somebody says, I need a chair, can you bring me a chair, please? Usually it's just no problem. And the reason is because we have a kind of paradigm in mind we have exemplars of, this is the kind of classic case of a chair. So like a kind of a standard dining chair, a standard office chair, a standard chair in the sitting room. These are all very different things, but they are kind of standard examples of what a chair is. So kind of the concept that we have of a chair is basically those things and stuff relevantly similar to them. That is how we think about what a chair is. And somebody says, get me a chair, I'm looking for something that is either one of those things or relevantly similar to one of those things. So how does this work in the case of the concept of God? Well, we just look at the paradigms. Okay, so the concepts I'm most familiar with are the kind of Abrahamic, let's say the Christian notion of God, an all-knowing and all-powerful, a morally perfect divine agency. Okay, so that's kind of one paradigm notion of what God is. And then there are other notions that get used around the world in different religions and different practices. Okay, so we can take all of those as paradigms of what we might mean by God. So then we can say, well, our concept of a God is one of those, something fitting that description, or something relevantly like those. Okay, so it turns out they're not exactly like that, but they're just kind of near enough like that. Yep, then that counts as a God. Okay, and how does this help with atheism? Well, we're saying that an atheist believes that there are no things like that. So there are no entities in existence that fit that definition or anything relevantly like them. Okay, so because this approach has this kind of, nothing relevantly like them in it, it's going to be a bit of a fuzzy definition. But that's fine. That's kind of what we want because our concepts are fuzzy. This makes good sense of how things actually work in practice. So if a new religion comes into existence and it comes with it a kind of a very sharp notion of what it means by God, what it understands by God, then somebody who's an atheist can sort of say, well, kind of given that definition, that seems pretty close to the kind of things that I've ruled out in the past. It's relevantly close to the Christian notion of God. So I don't believe that, okay? As an atheist, I'm already primed to say just those kind of entities don't exist. On the other hand, if somebody comes up with a kind of a religion that treats God as, nature, let's say, then what is an atheist meant to make of that? Well, I think, nature exists. So it's not like I'm going to say that stuff doesn't exist just because you're calling it God, right? You call God nature, nature God, doesn't mean I'm going to stop believing in nature or give up on my atheism. It's more like I'm going to say, well, that notion of God is a very, very long way from my kind of central understanding of that concept, the concept that I think about when I say I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. So, as an atheist, I believe in nature. Basically what I'm saying is I'm not really sure what you're saying in understanding God in that way. I mean, if you're kind of importing, divine presence or the divine mind and kind of putting that into your notion of nature, sure, I can say, yeah, I don't believe in any of that stuff because that's relevantly close to the concept of God that I have that's operative when I'm saying I don't believe in that kind of stuff. If you want to hear more about the philosophical arguments surrounding atheism, go and take a look at this playlist just here. Thank you so much to all my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and I hope to see you back here soon.